Broadcast of the regularly scheduled Committee of the Whole meeting will now begin.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeremiah Ellison. I'm the chair of the Committee of the Whole. I'll call to order this adjourned meeting for Wednesday, June 23rd. I'll note for the record that this meeting has remote participation by council members and city staff as authorized under the Minnesota Open Meeting Law, Section 13D.021, due to the declared state of local public health emergency. Additionally, the city will be recording and posting this meeting to the city's website and YouTube channel. This meeting is public and subject to the Minnesota Open Meeting Law. At this time, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll to verify the presence of a quorum.
Councilmember Reich.
Present.
Gordon. Fletcher.
Here.
Cunningham.
Present.
Osman.
Here.
Goodman.
Present.
Kano.
Here.
Bender.
Here.
Schrader.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Palmisano.
Present.
Jenkins. Gordon. Chair Ellison.
Present.
There are 11 members present.
Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. I will note that Vice President Jenkins will be joining us late today due to a conflicting appointment. Colleagues, our meeting today is our markup session. The entire focus of this meeting is to consider those amendments which council members may bring forward on the revisions proposed by the mayor related to funding from the American Rescue Plan Act. With the help of our budget, we have 3 prepared amendments before us today. The technical team will be displaying the amendments on the screen for the viewing public. The amendment packet will be added to the file in LIMS once this meeting is adjourned. When we've completed action on the prepared amendments, I will open the floor to any further proposals that were not done in time to be included in the packet. When we've completed all amendments, we will then direct staff to revise the budget accordingly in preparation for final action, which is currently slated for our next meeting of the full council on Friday, July 2nd at 9:30 a.m. Do any of my colleagues have questions about the process that I've just outlined? All right, not seeing anyone with any questions. And so we'll jump right into the prepared amendments. With that, our first amendment is from Council President Bender. Could you please go ahead and speak to this amendment? And I'll ask the tech team to bring up the amendment for display.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an amendment that I emailed out yesterday evening, and this would keep the total amount of funding allocated in the mayor's proposal equal, and it is shifting funds within a bucket of that proposed funding, both related to housing. So this would take a total of $300,000 from the NOAA Preservation Fund that is proposed to be $2 million, reducing that slightly and moving the funds to 2 different uses focused on supporting renters at risk for eviction or displacement, which would be legal services for renters in housing court, as well as some outreach and education funds for partners that Regulatory Services has relationships with to make sure that renters know their rights under the new off-ramp that the state has provided as they work to lift the eviction moratorium that has been in place, as well as the new city policies and funding that's available. I'm grateful for the work of both our CPED director and Regulatory Services director to help shape this. And as I emailed, this is not expected to affect our ability to meet our goal of NOAA preservation. Those are market-based real estate deals that have a lot of variability in their timing. In the past, when our staff has been able to put together a NOAA preservation, naturally occurring affordable housing preservation deal, there are funds that we can access if we have a really great opportunity to preserve affordable housing in our community. Happy to answer any questions and appreciate the work of a number of council members over the years on renter protections and building up supports for renters, including legal services and support.
Thank you, Council President. Do we have any questions, any discussion from colleagues regarding this first amendment from Council President Bender? All right, I'm not seeing any discussion. So if there's nothing further, we have the amendment offered by Council President Bender before us. I will ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Reich,
Aye.
Gordon,
Aye.
Fletcher,
Aye.
Cunningham,
Aye.
Osman,
Aye.
Goodman,
Aye.
Kano,
Aye.
Bender,
Aye.
Schrader,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Palmisano,
Aye.
Jenkins, Chair Ellison.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
And that motion carries. Next, we have amendment number 2. Our next amendment is from Councilmember Schrader. Councilmember Schrader, go ahead and speak to this amendment, please, and I'll ask the tech team to bring up the amendment for display.
Thank you, Chair Ellison. What this amendment does is move money from the Health Department into the Neighborhood Community Relations Department. You can see that in the language. I sent this out to everyone last night. Why I think this is important to NCR, has been doing this work for quite some times. We've supported them to do kind of the senior services through previous budgets, and it makes a lot of sense that this would do the exact same thing. And one other thing I want to point out that I'm really excited about is this will also expand, be able to expand the services that NCR has been able to do and fund with their providers into historic areas that have been underrepresented. So I'm excited that this will expand what we're able to do for senior services. I'm happy to answer any questions. I think it is pretty straightforward, and I'll kind of leave it to my colleagues if you have any questions about it.
Thank you, Councilmember Schrader. Are there any questions? Before I take any questions on this motion, I just want to note for the record that Council Vice President Jenkins has joined us. With that, I'll see if anyone has any questions for Councilmember Schrader. All right, I'm not seeing any questions. So if there's nothing further, we have the amendment offered by Councilmember Schrader before us. I will ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Reich,
Aye.
Gordon,
Aye.
Fletcher,
Aye.
Cunningham,
Aye.
Osman,
Aye.
Goodman,
Aye.
Kano,
Aye.
Bender,
Aye.
Schrader,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Palmisano,
Aye.
Jenkins.
Aye, and
Chair
on the
Ellison.
record, I do support the previous motion as well.
Chair Ellison.
Aye.
There are 13 ayes.
And that motion carries. Our next amendment is from Council Vice President Jenkins. Council Vice President Jenkins, can you go ahead and speak to amendment number 3, and I'll ask the tech team to bring the amendment up for display. And welcome to the meeting.
Thank you, and I believe it's already up for display, but this is an amendment that is intended to support the Division of Race and Equity, as well as provide resources for a dedicated staff person to the Truth and Reconciliation process, which is intended to help us as a city to continue to reckon with the challenges of the past and redress those through a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. There are recommendations that we will be discussing from the work group, and they will be providing us a presentation at the next POGO committee meeting, but these funds from the American Rescue Plan would be intended to assist in building up and blossoming that project. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Council Vice President Jenkins. Are there any questions from my colleagues? Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Chair Ellison, and thank you, Council Vice President, for bringing this forward. I will be supporting this. I just think that in this kind of very rushed time, it's helpful to have a little bit more information. So I appreciate you sending this out in advance. With the 500,000, could you talk a little bit more about kind of the dedicated? You said one dedicated staff person, but I see the difference between this year and the upcoming years. Maybe you could talk a little bit more to that, please.
Certainly. So this year is, I mean, as you know, we're halfway through the year. And then the subsequent years is to support staffing, but also the process of truth and reconciliation, the community engagement that will be necessary, the development of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and supporting those recommendations. So yeah, I mean, we're 6 months into 2021, so the numbers kind of reflect that, and then 22 and 23 will be fully operational. And so I don't know, I hope that helps a little bit.
That's perfect. That's exactly what I was going for. So thank you very much for that. I think especially in light of, you know, how far we need to go, even within our city enterprise, I think this is important work to fund. So thank you again.
Thank you.
All right, I'm not. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support this amendment. My question is more about this unallocated pool of money that everyone now seems to be pulling money out of. Is that a thing? How much money is in that pool? It seems like everyone's now saying, I want my thing. So I'm wondering if Amelia can tell us what this unallocated money is. Council President Bender's amendment said, take money from this and put it into that. That's something I understand. I was unaware that there's like unallocated money that we can all fight over. So maybe we could have a better explanation of that, so we're all on an equal playing field. But I do support Councilmember Jenkins' motion because this is something we would fund through the normal budget process.
Yeah, no, I have a similar question, and I would ask Amelia Prover to come and speak to that, because we are gonna, I think, we're seeing a little bit of a proliferation of this happening now, and so I'm curious myself. So, Ms. Prover, if you're able to respond.
Certainly. Thank you, Chair Ellison and Councilmember Goodman. I'm wondering if the clerk could pull up Schedule 8 while I'm talking. If you can do that, I think that would help give a visual to folks. So the ARP dollars that we are receiving from the federal government, the total amount, as you guys know, is $271 million. We have already received $135.5 million of those dollars. We're scheduled to receive the second half of that allocation next May. So from a cash flow perspective, we have that $135.5 million in the bank. The mayor's recommendations in total are about $99 million. So when we're looking at the amount of money that we've received from the federal government, minus the stuff that is in the mayor's proposal, that leaves about $36.3 million remaining that we have on hand at the city that has not been planned for yet. Now, that is just sort of the facts, the dollars that we have, the approval process that we're through, appropriating half of it. I think it will be the work of policymakers to decide how much you're comfortable with spending in phase 1 versus phase 2. We've talked a little bit about, and I know council members have had conversations as well about this tension between getting needed help out the door quickly and reserving money for spending after more public engagement has happened, after more clarity has been given to us around uses, particularly the revenue replacement use. That is a big part of the guidance and certainly something that we have experienced at the city. So there are, I think, pros and cons to spending more dollars earlier in the process versus after we have done work on the 2022 budget and have really solid revenue projections for the next 5 years. So those are sort of the issues around spending more now versus later. The facts of the matter are we have $135.5 million of our total $271 million. And the remaining amount that we have sort of in the city is 36.3, and that is the unallocated amount that is being referenced in some of these amendments. I'm happy to stand for any other questions.
Thank you, Ms. Prover. Councilmember Goodman, do you have any follow-ups or are you satisfied with the response we've gotten so far?
Well, I'm unsatisfied with the process, to be honest. I mean, this has just created this gigantic slush fund where everyone's now going to race as fast as they can by the council meeting to pick their pet projects and throw them in. I'm not talking about Councilmember Jenkins' process. To be fair, the Truth and Reconciliation process is something we would pay for out of the city's budget. We're in this. This is our thing. So the fact that we found this money to use for that process, I totally support. But I would urge us to not turn this into everyone's pet project in the middle of an election. And if I were staff, I probably would have been much more direct about what the money is for and is not. I am alarmed by what I think is coming next, which is just everyone picking their $500,000 to give to whoever they want. There's critical needs all over. So I think we have to be more planful about it rather than just having amendment after amendment. This Truth and Reconciliation process is one that we've all agreed on, but there's like thousands of other things we've already agreed on that now everyone's going to say they want to spend money on. So to be honest, I'm kind of disappointed with the way this seems to be playing out.
Yeah, and I also was a little surprised by the unobligated. I will say that Council Vice President Jenkins sent this ahead of time. It is the last scheduled amendment that we have, and so I think that I feel confident supporting it because I've been able to see it ahead of time. But other amendments we haven't been able to have as much discussion around. So, Council President Bender.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Something that Council Vice President had in her amendment was an issue that I wanted to raise later after the specific amendments came through, which is an interest in working together with all of you and staff to understand what capacity might be needed for program evaluation for the ARPA dollars overall. And I think given the amount of funds that we're talking about and some of the innovative or pilot projects or and the heavy emphasis on community-based funding, which is great and I support, I think it's worth asking now what resources we have in place for program evaluation and what we need to have in place, and if that needs to be funded, to consider that now along with the allocations. And I think it'd be helpful to hear, and I just haven't had time, but intend to try to pull something together again with all of you ahead of next council if needed. Just understanding kind of what things would be in the purview of the budget office or the audit team or the individual departments that are administering the funds, because I do think that tracking the allocation of these funds, the expenditures, what populations we're reaching, we're having such an emphasis rightfully on race equity and reaching our most vulnerable populations, and I think we will want to be able to assess our progress and make sure that we're tracking what's working best to meet those goals. And I see Ms. Kruger wanting to respond, so thank you.
Yeah, so I think those are really good questions, and I can share a little bit about the work and thinking that we've done in the budget office. And then I think there's room to probably explore this even more with other departments. But One of the positions that is in the mayor's proposal to implement this first round is an additional staff person in the budget office. And the idea is that one of their responsibilities would be in tracking these dollars, but also making sure that we are reporting on the outcomes of the programs funded through ARP dollars. One of the requirements from the federal government on ARP dollars is to not only do the sort of regular accounting type reporting that we do for those dollars, but also some performance metrics. We don't have all of the detail on that yet. I'm expecting it in July and August, but that is what that sort of additional FTE, temporary FTE in budget is meant to do, to be able to make sure that we are collecting performance information about these proposals. Now that's a little bit of different flavor from a true program evaluation. And that is, I think, a little bit more program by program. I know there are many that include that in the dollar amount and in the proposal, but it's certainly something that we could take more of a deep dive on to see if there are additional supports that would be helpful for new programs. So the guaranteed basic income is one. I know that includes dollars and a focus on evaluation. I think there are several in additional in the CPED world that already include that thinking, but it's something we can follow up on and see if there's any holes.
Thank you. And since I was in queue, I also appreciate Councilmember Goodman's question and your comments, Mr. Chair, about just making sure that we are, you know, kind of taking a citywide view, as of course we each are working to support the communities in our wards, but also, you know, making sure that we have a lot of citywide policies in place about geographic prioritization of populations. So I think some of the amendments that might be coming where they are very specific might seem more appropriate as a citywide pot of funds that are appropriated based on geographic prioritization that we've already adopted in policy.
Thank you, Council President. I put myself in queue, and this is more for the public's sake, just because I have these numbers available for reference. But prior to the last, or we haven't yet voted on this, and we will in a moment. But I do sense that there's support, at least for this amendment. But as it stands, exactly how much money are we going to spend for this round, minus this amendment, because we haven't voted on it yet?
So in 2021, there's 87.8 million. In 22, there's 4.5. In 23, there's 4.6 million. In 24, there's 2.2 million. And so that brings the total over all years up to 99, leaving about 36.3 remaining unallocated in this round, and the anticipation of an additional 135.5 million in May of 22.
Right. So this $500,000 that we're voting on, should it pass, would take that 87.8 and raise it to 88.3. And so I just want that to be clear that we're talking about increasing the amount. If we vote on another $500,000, you know, we're going to, you know, we're going to be at 88, or we're going to be at, you know, getting closer to 89, and we're going to be just kind of going up and up. And so I just want that to be clear, that to Council Member Goodman's point, that we are just simply increasing the overall amount that we're spending here. Staff and working with the mayor's office, I'm sure, was very intentional about how much money they aimed to spend, and so I think it would be great to get an opinion for maybe from the mayor's office about how much they mind that we increase that amount. certainly the mayor's office was not agnostic about how fast we moved. There was a lot of urgency about how fast we moved to get this money out the door. And so I don't imagine that the mayor's office or that the city's departments who proposed this amount are going to be sort of agnostic about how much we're spending if this is the amount that they chose. And again, we're getting a little bit off of item number 3, and me as much as anyone else. So that's not to point the finger, but if folks have comments about item number 3, I would love to take those comments. But if not, we can save comments, and I'm happy to call on folks in the queue after we've voted on Council Vice President Jenkins' amendment. So I'll check with Councilmember Fletcher and see if it's a comment that you would like to state now or save for after this item is voted on.
We should vote on Council Vice President's motion first.
Okay, cool. I see a number of other people in queue. Is that okay with everyone else in queue? I'm not seeing anybody speak up that they want to speak on item number 3. Oh, yes. Okay, cool. So with that, and not seeing anything else on this motion, then I would ask the clerk to call the roll on item number 3, on amendment number 3.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Osmond.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Jenkins.
Aye.
Chair Ellison.
Aye.
There are 13 ayes.
So with that, we have concluded all of our prepared amendments. I know that we have a few other amendments being brought forward, but I also know that there's quite a bit of discussion in general. Just going to defer to the clerk real quick. Is it appropriate for us to have general discussion before taking up the next amendment, or do we need to have an amendment on display before we can jump into the rest, continue discussion?
Chair Ellison, I think that's up to the body. What you may want to consider dealing with amendments first and then saving kind of general discussion once the motion has been made to actually forward the resolution to council or to take action on the budget itself. But whatever works for the body is fine.
If folks are okay with it, I would like to take up just some of the discussion that folks want to have now, because I think that it could give some weight to the decisions that we're about to make around the amendments that weren't sent prior. So if that's okay with everyone, I'm going to call on the folks in queue before taking up the next amendment. So not seeing anyone jump up to refute or argue that, so I will call on Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to pick up on Councilmember Goodman and Bender's comments and just kind of try to frame up how I'm thinking about this work, because I think we actually have a big responsibility here. This is happening in a less structured way than a lot of our traditional budget conversations. And that means it is our job as a body to keep ourselves accountable and to do disciplined work to use this money. We absolutely could spin out of control unaccountably and start funding pet projects out of this money if we all decided to support each other in doing that. We shouldn't do that. I think it's pretty important that we be really focused on the important purpose that this money was allocated for, which is recovery from a terrible pandemic that we've all lived through. And there's an awful lot of need and there's an awful lot of work to do on that. And so we should be looking at this through several lenses. One is it effective to that purpose? Two is it something we can deliver with urgency? And I think that's a really important standard that we've got to hold everything through. Is there actually a plan, if we allocate this money, for it to actually get used for that purpose in a timely way? And the reason I think that's important is because this process has had very limited community engagement. We saw very limited community engagement from the mayor in his process, and then we had one hearing that 20 people came to, and we're spending, somewhere between $80 and $230 million here today, depending on what we decide to do as a body. It should definitely be closer to 80 than 230, but those unallocated funds are available to us. I really think that if there's something that's not going to roll out until much later in the year or early next year, we should be thinking about holding it for phase 2, so that we can do more community engagement and there can be more community voice in this work. So we should be holding everything accountable to that, not just our amendments, but also the proposals in the mayor's budget. And I'll just signal for my colleagues that there are items in the mayor's budget that I am not yet convinced meet that timeliness threshold and should move through in phase 1. And I may have amendments on the second if I'm not ready to bring them today, but I think it's worth holding everything to that standard, that this can't be just funding popular projects whether or not we can actually execute them. This has to be, what's the stuff we can actually move to actually make an impact for our community? And let's just make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable to that. And I think the amendments coming through that we've seen so far, the 2 we just approved, meet that standard for me. They've got a plan. They're going to have an impact that's important, and they're clear about how they're getting implemented this year. I think that's the standard that all the other amendments need to meet. And I guess one thing that I would just remind everybody is that the phase 2 money, part of the purpose of that is to put us on a glide path back to recovery, because our economy doesn't just turn back on. The revenue we lost during COVID doesn't just magically reappear. Hotels are still at between 20 and 40% vacant or occupancy, depending on the night. So we're not generating the kind of revenue that we were. And part of the phase 2 is to replace lost revenue so that we are able to continue functioning smoothly. And we need to make sure we understand what is being projected in terms of need for that. So I wonder if Ms. Kruger or anybody else could just comment on sort of how much of a budget hole we're projecting for the next 2 years, to make sure that we're, as we think about phase 2 as unallocated funds that we might pull down for whatever right now, just remind everybody that they're yet to be allocated, but that they are actually filling a purpose in our budget and in our local economy.
Ms. Kruger, are you able to
Absolutely, Chair Ellison.
comment?
Yes, and thank you, Councilmember Fletcher, for that question. I think that there is, I don't have specific numbers for the 2022 budget right now, but I will speak to the major factors that we will be dealing with when setting the budget for next year. The first is the sales tax numbers. As you referenced, hospitality, we have yet to really see a month where we've seen significant improvement in the receipts, right? We know it's coming. We know that there are restrictions being lifted every day, but right now we're projecting forward into a year for which we really have not a lot to go on. This is a unprecedented event. And so we are forecasting growth in the sales taxes, certainly from this year, but they will not be at the level that they were pre-pandemic in 2022. So we'll still be facing a hole in our sales taxes. And then just to your point, Councilmember Fletcher, we are holding open about 300 positions citywide to meet our lowered revenue. And departments will tell you and have been telling you that they are sorely needed positions, in addition to the new work that departments have been taking up to manage and to support the city. So there will be both lower than usual revenues into 2022, though we will be growing, and high need on the general fund to support the work of the city and to start to bring back some of those positions. And just to reiterate, bringing back positions at a city to pre-COVID levels is an authorized use of ARP funds, as is spending on revenue reduction. And in the city of Minneapolis, because of our mix of revenues, because we rely on property taxes as well as things like sales taxes and permits and fees, we have seen a significant revenue loss. And when we apply the formula that the ARP guidance gives us to calculate what that amount is, that we can use to sort of say this is the revenue loss to comport with their guidelines, it's as much as the total amount that we've received from the federal government. So I hope that gives a flavor of what we're looking at. I think it is extremely important to consider those needs when thinking about the total amount authorized in this phase one.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you both. Councilmember Gordon.
Well, thank you very much, and I certainly appreciate the conversation here and supported the amendments that came forward. I wanted to highlight an amendment I've been working on and exploring options about, and I think it's going to be coming up later now because I've been working on it with Councilmember Osmond to address some critical needs, particularly in the West Bank, Cedar Riverside area, and even stretching into Seward. People may recall that we used to have some funding support for youth outreach workers during the kind of financial crisis and amendments. That money disappeared. Those were some key people who were really helping with addressing the opioid crisis, especially with young folks, getting people regularly into treatment and out of trouble. And there are still very dramatic and intense needs there. What I want us to be able to do is either reallocate funding from somewhere else or maybe direct funding in a larger unidentified area, or use some of the reserve money that we do have so that we can help address the critical needs in the Cedar Riverside area. So I'm looking forward and hoping there'll be an amendment coming forward today that I'll be supporting. But if not, that something that I'll be working on very carefully for when this returns to the council, maybe for an amendment there, and wanted to foreshadow that for sure.
Thank you, Councilmember Gordon. Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that Councilmember Fletcher really stated well all of my concerns, and I just hope and trust that we can all hold ourselves to phase one money for the rest of this process. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Osmond.
Thank you. I was just waiting for the amendment that Councilmember Gordon talked about, and just waiting when that will be up. Whenever you're ready, I can talk about it.
I think now is fine.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Gordon, for your leadership on this. As you can see, this $500,000 is for public health and public safety challenges that have contributed to the unequal impact of the pandemic throughout the grants of organizations to address the need of youth, opioid addiction, and public safety in Cedar Riverside. I take the points of the council members that we should wait phase two, but we have $40 million sitting here, and the community needs the money now, and also there are organizations that are able to help the community that have suffered the pandemic and everything else that follow last 12 months. As I understand, phase two money will not be discussed until next summer, and we need to make sure that we are addressing the issue and what the money is for. Also, I want to also talk about the when we talk about geographically and there are 6 cultural districts, and this is something that it's a citywide proposal, and it's not because we are either allocating money for Cedar Riverside and this and that, but it's a citywide proposal that that is going through that the money that's going to our cultural corridors, and really excited to work with you and make sure that we are getting this money out of the door. We have $40 million sitting, and I do not agree that we should push this back on phase 2. We should be able to address the need of the community, and my community are facing a lot of challenges, and every council meeting I talked about the challenges we have in here, and I really appreciate your support and your leadership. Many of you have been here before me, and I'm trying to do everything I can to help the residents and make sure they are getting fair resource and a fair resource throughout the city of Minneapolis. So I appreciate your support, and this money will definitely help the community, and I hope much more of that will be coming in the future years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Osman. I just want to acknowledge that Councilmember Kano is also in queue, but I believe it's to bring an amendment, so I will hold off on calling on her. I've put myself in queue, but also before I make a few comments, I wanted to allow Ms. Kruger to make a few comments just to clarify, I think, some factual information that may have just come up. So, Ms. Kruger.
Thank you, Chair Ellison. And Councilmember Osman, I just want to clarify a little bit the expected timeline for the remaining discussions about ARP funds. So right now, the plan is to return to the remainder of our ARP dollars this fall after the mayor's budget has been released in the sort of mid-August. So the plan right now is to start that decision making at the end of this year, with decisions coming hopefully far earlier than next summer. So I just wanted to clarify that. I also think that we should, I'm remembering right now that the health department has recently received some grant funding that is aimed at dealing with treating opioid addiction. And I don't have the details on that, but I just want to put it out there that might be something that we could investigate. And I've asked my staff to take a look about other sources of money that might be getting at the same goal. So I just wanted to highlight that for you. We're researching it and we'll let you know what we find. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kruger. I have a number of colleagues in queue, and I'm happy to get to everyone. I wanted to propose a bit of an idea to maybe handle some of the amendments that are coming up that were not prepared prior, that council members haven't had a lot of time to digest or discuss or ask questions about. And so I'm going to try to fit all that about a potential plan. Before I kind of lay out what I think the next step should be, I want to just first acknowledge that, all of us are here to work hard on behalf of our wards. And I think that no one, I don't expect any of my colleagues to just bring forward anything that is fluff, especially in times like we're living in right now. I know that everything that people are going to bring forward is going to be critically important. But I also think that due diligence matters, and we can throw a lot of money in every single direction, but without knowing whether that money can get out the door, without having a little bit of time to vet whether it's an appropriate use, which it looks like this would be. I'm not sort of claiming that any of these aren't, but without that time to do the necessary due diligence, and especially with the unstructured nature of the quote unobligated funds, even the phrasing of unobligated funds is a bit of a misnomer. These are funds that I expect staff very much so expects to obligate towards some use in the immediate near future, in the fall, and so I just want to acknowledge that this isn't a pool of free money, and that I talked about the mayor maybe having opinions about us. I talked about the mayor maybe having opinions about us going outside the parameters that him and staff have laid forward. I personally have no problem with that, but I do think that we need to have a bit of due diligence. If there is an appropriate use for us to sort of swap money from within what's been allocated, I think that that's probably ideal. If it is appropriate for us to allocate funds that have not yet been allocated, I'm okay with that. But I do think that there should be a certain amount of due diligence, and I'm sensing from my colleagues that with the amendments that we're seeing just this morning, that this hasn't, that people feel like that due diligence hasn't happened for them, or that they don't know that it's happened. And so I would propose that we could take up these amendments right now, and I'm not sure how they'll shake out. I don't think that I would be able to vote for any other motions coming forward from unobligated funds in this moment without some more time to do my own due diligence and see whether this is an essential need that should be added to our overall budget. And so I just want to state that. And so folks could risk having their amendments voted down right now, or council members can who have not yet had their amendments voted on yet I would offer to take these back up and basically do a second markup at the next CAL meeting. I know that a number of us, because of how fast this process was laid out, have not been able to have all the meetings that we wanted to have with community partners to figure out what kinds of changes really need to be made. Again, we had the one public hearing where only 19 people were registered, and I don't think all 19 were available to speak. And so I think, and so I also want to appreciate the fact that this timeline was incredibly fast, in addition to being a little unstructured, and that it wasn't just fast for council members, it was also fast for the public. And so I would be okay with council members taking a little bit more time to vet their amendments before we vote on them today, and that we could take them up at the next CAL meeting. So I'll put that offer out there. I hope that's acceptable to my colleagues, but I will also totally accept if folks want to have their amendments voted on in this moment. I'll try to put that in writing in the next couple of minutes here, and in the meantime, I will give the floor to Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and very well put. I'm in the exact same spot. I think that these proposals, while well-meaning for the wards that they represent, I think to what's been said from my colleagues before, like I also have areas of need that could definitely use this money. I think we don't get this opportunity to have these large sums of money, and what I would be hoping we'd be looking at is how to do better, not just fund small pet projects that will help one part of the city, but how do we do better by all of our constituents? How do we put this together to have something bigger? This timetable that the mayor has proposed has not allowed that, and there's a very good reason for that. We need to get this money out the door. But I think I agree with many of my colleagues on the unallocated money. We need to look at what budget hole we're going to have. The fact that we have 300 positions froze in the city. I'm really cautious about spending any more money than we've already talked about without a lot more detail about what that would go into, because I want to put out that our city workers have been, been asked to do new tasks on top of the tasks they already had and have done an amazing job during this crisis. And to add new things onto that list without adding more staff, I think is a recipe for disaster. And I think we need to be very cautious about that.
Thank you, Councilmember Schrader. Council President Bender.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I had similar thoughts that have been expressed. I guess I just do want to offer to my colleagues throughout this next week my support in, understanding what things maybe have synergy or are covered with funds that have already been proposed in the mayor's ARPA proposal. I would love, as other colleagues have said, to be able to have the chance to follow up with the appropriate staff and departments to hear from them about, what priorities they identified that maybe didn't make it into the first round in the mayor's proposal, or get their assessment of some of the ideas that we're seeing in these amendments that just came today on the floor. So I agree it would be really great for us to have the time to review these ideas with staff in particular. Thanks.
Thank you, Council President Bender. Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to remind my colleagues that in the mayor's budget proposal, in this one, in phase one, there's, and Director Kruver, please correct me if I'm wrong, but there's $1.75 million in youth and community safety funds for grants to organizations, to youth development, and opioid addiction prevention and treatment is included in that, is my understanding. I also just would urge my colleagues that every week or two that we delay this phase one funding means businesses closing and more residents facing housing insecurity and staring down a fiscal cliff. The legislature already has a plan in place to off-ramp the eviction moratorium. I really appreciate my colleagues' attention and thoughtfulness in making some amendments here this morning, the couple that we've done, but we need to get relief and stimulus into our community now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmisano. And I see that Mayor Woodridge is here to speak on the subject matter, which I'm happy to allow, but I also want to just say that I don't think anybody's debating the importance of the subject matter. I think that we are sort of, trying to decide, how we want to proceed. And while everybody, I think, is proceeding in good faith, I do think that if everybody starts throwing in $500,000 of unobligated dollars towards their thing, that we're not being incredibly disciplined. And so that's really, I think, the crux of the discussion. Not a question of whether the workers is important. With that sort of disclaimer, Ms. Woodridge, if you would like to speak on this subject matter, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President and Council. I just wanted to follow up on something that Ms. Kruver was talking about. So the health department has recently received 2 different grants, one from the Minnesota Department of Human Services that is geared towards opioid work. And there is an organization called Metro Youth Diversion located in the Cedar Riverside area that is receiving 2 sub-grants from us, one to provide naloxone and training on naloxone, and the other to do some youth prevention services. Then in that same grant, there is an $150,000 that we have out for RFP right now. And proposals for that are due the end of next week. The second grant that we've received is the big CDC one that is more COVID oriented, but built into that grant as well is a bit of money that we will be RFPing out later this year related to opioid work. So I just wanted to make clear that we do have some grant money already in the door that we are using for this purpose.
Thank you for that context. And also just wanted to both acknowledge and hopefully clarify for Councilmember Palmisano. I absolutely think that we still plan to take up this full to take up this on the full council on July 2nd. But if council members wanted to take time to make some amendments on July 1, I know that's a quick turnaround that we could discuss after the fact, but I think that it would be worthwhile for us to take that time, especially given the unique situation that we're in. But I don't think we're looking at pushing the entire process back. But I would offer, yes, I would offer that we could make amendments on July 1. So thank you for that question, and I definitely agree that we need this relief urgently. Councilmember Osmond.
Thank you. Points well taken. I would like to pull out my amendment and maybe circle back and have more discussion about it. I do have a question though. Are we budgeting the rest of the unallocated funding for this fall? Because that's what I'd like to see. Or starting to budget around next fall. The $40 million that are sitting, are we planning to budget that? If Emily can answer that, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, my understanding is that we will be taking that up this fall, but yes, let's have the experts. Ms. Kruger, if you could come and give one more explanation of that.
Yes, happy to, Chair Ellison, and thank you for the question, Councilmember Osmond. The plan is to, excuse me, continue to plan for the unobligated amount that we already have, as well as the remaining 135.5 million. We'll be getting it date certain, May 2022, so it's not a matter of will we or won't we get it. So we can begin planning for spending the rest of it. We'll need to be careful about cash flow, but I think that we will be looking at the entirety of the remaining ARP dollars this fall.
Thank you so much. We have Council Vice President Jenkins, and then I'm going to put myself in queue.
Thank you, Chair Ellison.
Real quick for the clerk, I believe sorry, right before you go, Council Vice President, I believe that Councilmember Osmond is pulling his amendment, and so just for the tech team, I think it's okay for us to take the motion down. I don't think we're considering it at the moment. Council Vice President Jenkins, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Ellison, and I really do appreciate all the commentary, dialogue that my amendment spurred. I do want to be very clear that a truth and reconciliation process is not a pet process. It's a citywide, very necessary work that we have to do. But that being said, and I know all of you understand and appreciate that. Regarding the 40 million, I'm just curious, I know we had several cities come and talk about their process, as well as professors and experts from the University of Minnesota. So when are we gonna have a community engagement process around the unobligated funds? Does anybody have a sense of that, or what that process is going to look like?
Council Vice President Jenkins and Chair Ellison, I'm happy to speak to what I know right now about that. So the mayor's office has reached out to our Department of Neighborhood and Community Relations to start drafting what that would look like. There's no real set plan yet, but the discussions are in the works. The idea is that we would start that sort of later in the summer, so that there is some data back from that engagement in time for planning in the fall.
Thank you, Ms. Kruger.
Thank you so much. So I would actually like to move, and I want to thank the clerks for drafting this language. But I would like to make a motion to continue the mayor's budget proposals as amended to the regular committee of the whole, scheduled for July 1st, 2021 at 10 a.m. I think that there are enough amendments that we should at least consider. And I think that this process was moved at such a speed that it would be fair and warranted for council members to have a little bit more time. My request, and obviously the council will vote for whatever we want to vote for, but I would request, and this counts for me as much as anybody else, that we do, given the nature of the timeline, that people do have their budgets teed up ahead of Cal, so that we can properly vet them, and that if folks are going to bring amendments on July 1 that they were not able to send ahead of time, that they be moving money from within the allocated budget, and that we not sort of run into this unobligated funds discussion again. Obviously, I can't make anyone do that. I'm not setting that as a rule, just making that as a request of as the chair of the committee. So that's my motion. Again, I think Councilmember Goodman said it best. With the CVPs, with Council Vice President's amendment, it was something we had all seen beforehand. It's something that we would have inevitably funded beforehand, and we all know that, which is why it was appropriate for it to be included, even if it did come from that unobligated pool. The other amendments were not able to be vetted before time, and council members can still make the case for why the best use or the best source is that unobligated pool. But I think that we should all take the time, if we're going to make that case, we should take the time to actually make that case to each other. So with that, I want to go ahead and make my motion. I think that motion is before us now. And so if there's any discussion, folks, please put yourself in queue. I'm not seeing any discussion, and so I'll ask the clerk to, Councilmember Cano has a comment.
Yes, Councilmember Ellison, I was just wondering if I was going to be allowed to bring my amendment forward today, or if you're saying that we're done.
You know what? Sorry. Yeah, you're certainly welcome to bring your amendment forward. I will take my motion off the table and bring it forward once you're done. I'll bring my motion forward at the end of the meeting. But if you want to bring your amendment forward right now, then yes, you're welcome to do that.
Okay, thank you so much. I just wasn't sure where the conversation just kind of spiraled in all kinds of ways, and I just wanted to be sure that I got a chance to present the motion that I've been working on with community leaders on Lake Street. So let's see if the city clerk would be able to pull it up on the screen. I just want to double check. Okay, great. So I'll read it and then I'll be happy to have a discussion on this. So this is a motion to amend the 2021 adopted budget schedule, aid expenses by department in the American Rescue Plan Act Fund to decrease the amount of unobligated funds by $350,000 and increase the allocation to the city coordinator's office by $350,000 to address the systemic inequities exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic through grants to expert organizations focusing on mitigating commercial sexual exploitation to support the city's blueprint to address and end human trafficking and improve public safety in the Lake Street area. So I'll go ahead and speak to this and would be happy to take questions. I think many of us realize that Lake Street is the city's second largest contributor to the tax base of Minneapolis when it comes to commercial corridors next to the downtown area. And this is statistics from the Meet Minneapolis tourism agency that we fund. And so, Lake Street expands probably minimally 5 different wards. Councilmember Lisa Bender, Councilmember Jenkins, Councilmember Osman, myself, Councilmember Johnson, Councilmember Gordon, Councilmember Schrader, and so this particular work really impacts the entire vibrancy, sustainability, and resiliency of that corridor. Through the pandemic, I think we have seen how many of us have explicitly talked about the exacerbation of racial inequities that the pandemic has had on communities. This particular body of work it is a body of work, and so I just want to address this word that has been used throughout today, that the word pet project. I think that I just want to be really clear that addressing commercial sexual exploitation is not a pet project. And if you were a woman, I think you would understand that. And if you were an Indigenous person, you would understand that. And if you are a Black person, you would understand that. And I share that because those are the populations, women, Black people, Indigenous people, that are primarily and singularly, and I would say disproportionately negatively impacted by the human trafficking and sexual abuse we see in our city. That work, those challenges really show up in very visible ways in specific areas of the Lake Street corridor, but they don't simply live in that corridor. They really expand and connect to a lot of the other issues that we're facing with people experiencing homelessness, with some of the work that already our colleagues Cam Gordon and Councilmember Osmond pointed out relating to the issues around chemical dependency and the opioid, public health concern. So I just want to be really clear with colleagues and the public that from my perspective, the amendments we have seen today are not pet projects. For example, Councilmember Schrader's amendment to support senior services, that's not a pet project. That is a significant population in our district, in our community, in our city, and I would never be disrespectful and denigrating to call it a pet project. So I just want to be clear that the people who are bringing amendments today have done a lot of work on many of these fronts. Just because you as a council member have not been involved in that work doesn't mean that work isn't valid, that it doesn't exist, and that you can erase it with your white supremacist words today. So I just want to be really clear that I'm personally really offended by the use of that word, because I see how these issues impact our communities every day, and how they impact specifically communities of color, undocumented communities, immigrant communities, communities that we all claim to care about. But for some reason, when we get into these dialogues, that care just goes out the window. So this particular amendment is to support and expand and strengthen that body of work that we have long institutionalized, foremost and primarily through the work of Shunu in the city coordinator's office as our lead, agent on addressing human trafficking issues, labor issues relating to forced and unpaid labor, as well as commercial sexual exploitation. And if any of you have been following that work or supporting it or meeting with Shunu over the last 4 to 5 years, you know that we have a blueprint that we're developing with community members, with community groups to feed this entire sort of plan for how we're going to tackle this. Iterations of conversations have happened. The pandemic has significantly changed that terrain, and it has definitely made this issue more difficult to root out, and it has deepened some of those relationships that really lock people in to lack of economic resources, job stability, housing stability, that forces them to be in abusive relationships where they don't have a lot of choices about what to do and where to go when it comes to getting food on the table, finding a place to sleep at night, or even trying to get a job somewhere in our community. So this particular amendment is really meant to support the organizations who have been a part of that work and will continue to be a part of that work. As Ms. Kruver has outlined for us, this work is forward-looking, and so we are anticipating that the blueprint the city will soon approve will include the continued guidance and participation of these local experts and nonprofit groups who are really dedicated to this issue. I can't tell you how many times I've been in rooms over the last 3 to 5 years where people have just yelled at me for not putting enough money on the table for these organizations to do their work. Many of you can relate to that as we have conversations about infusing investments in the Office of Violence Prevention. So I think this type of work is very long-term. It is about seeding plans and work now that we hopefully will see come to fruition anywhere from 6 months to 9 months to 12 months down the road by, again, just planting the seed today, making sure that people understand that we are taking care of this issue, we are paying attention to it. We know that we weren't able to be a part of the federal allocation process from our congressional district for this particular body of work, which does include the city attorney's office and does include Hennepin County. But it doesn't mean that we can't be the first money in to really get a conversation going and get people invested in believing that we can and and should be ending some of these, abusive relationships when it comes to how women and young adults, and as Councilmember Jenkins has mentioned many times, the transgender community are treated in this space of what we would now maybe consider the de facto red light district of the city, which has become Lake Street. And so if we're gonna legalize prostitution, great, then let's do it. Let's get that job done. But if we're not, then let's be real about the resources that it's going to need to really address how this is happening in the community in ways that are harming people today. And, we're not so much worried about the folks who have figured out how to do it in a safe way and have figured out how to do it in a way where they're consenting and where they're participating fully. But a lot of the concerns that I hear from business owners and corridor stakeholders like the Lake Street Council and Main Street Alliance and others relates to the lack of consent in what's happening on Lake Street, and particularly when women and other vulnerable populations are heavily drugged and are in such vulnerable positions where they need more of the support from the community-based organizations to be able to show up in these conversations that the city is having with other partners. So I just wanted to briefly provide some background on the work, really talk about the importance of it, really reframe the whole conversation from pet projects to really being responsive and relevant to the communities that we represent, which is why we have geographic representation. The issues and items in Ward 9 won't be the same as the issues and items in Ward 3. And so I think we need to be just respectful of each other's, dedication to the work in our specific districts and our specific communities, and not demean it in the ways that I've heard it today. So hoping to receive questions and thoughts on this amendment, and then happy to take a stab at a vote.
Thank you, Councilmember Cano. I put myself in queue. I think that your comments about semantics are well taken, and we can all be careful with how we use our words. But I do also just want to clarify that I think that the caution that was laid out before, in which the term pet project was used, I think was less about the importance of the work coming before us, because again, the work that you're speaking on is incredibly important. And I think that those comments were more to caution us about the efficacy of our process, and given the speed at which this is happening, and given the relative lack of structure at which this is happening, that we risk losing our discipline if we don't have a little bit more due diligence around the use of unobligated funds. So I think that's more what the discussion was about. I know that Councilmember Osman pulled his amendment and will be, I'm sure, not tossing it aside. I think he'll probably make his case and work with colleagues to figure out what the next steps are. I think that this work is critically important. For that do the same, but I'm also happy to take it up for a vote. But I do think that if it's not able to succeed, if this motion is not able to succeed, I think it will have more to do with people's concerns around the process that we're engaged in, and it'll have a lot less to do with whether members of the council consider it important work. So that's my comments, and my offer from my previous motion that I will bring back forward at the end of the meeting was to say that if folks were worried that their amendments would not pass today, and that they wanted to take some time to talk it over with colleagues, allow us to have some necessary constituent meetings for us to understand how we should be prioritizing our work and money, that I'm offering to continue this discussion to July 1st, to the regular council meeting on July 1st, where you could bring this amendment forward then as well. And so we can take it up now, or we can take it up on July 1st. But I just wanted to clarify that I don't think anyone was intending to use the word pet project as a way to demean the work. I think that people were rightfully pointing out that we should have some discipline in our process. Those are my comments.
Yes,
Councilmember Cano, I'm going to call on Vice President Jenkins. I will call you after that.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Ellison. I just want to state on the record, I would be much more inclined to support Councilmember Cano's motion on July 1st at the proposed continued committee of the whole meeting, and have more time to understand how these resources would be utilized. Thank you.
Councilmember Cano, you're in queue.
Okay, thank you so much. So I just wanted to double check on this proposed process that you have offered, Councilmember Ellison. So you're suggesting that we can continue these conversations at the Thursday, July 1st committee of the whole meeting, which would happen before the council meeting, where we are anticipated to adopt and sort of formalize these budgetary allocations, correct?
Yes, and that would also give you, I think, an opportunity to, we were only able to have 3 amendments prepared ahead of time. And I know that, I'll speak for myself. I certainly had amendments that I would have liked to have brought, but didn't finish them in time for the meeting. And so given the speed of our process, I think it's fair that folks have another week to prepare their amendments so that the body feels like we're well prepared to make a decision and folks don't feel like they're making a decision abruptly.
Yes, I understand what you're saying now, and I just wanted to verify that I wasn't going to be delaying our full adoption by another cycle, which would have been, I think, past the 4th of July holiday and well into the end of July, and I just didn't want to be the person to be doing that. So if we can, I feel confident now that if we can take these conversations up again on Thursday, July 1st, and then as a full body still stay on track and on timeline to adopt and approve these budgetary allocations on Friday, July 2nd, I would be happy to withdraw my motion today and to work with colleagues on the specifics of it and bring it back in its maybe renewed or different version on Thursday, July 1st. So I appreciate the guidance and I'm happy to do that.
Great. Yes, that is my intention, and it is also my intention to still pass this on the completed version on July 2nd as well. So I will take that as a formal withdrawal of the amendment. Thank you, Councilmember Cano. We still have 2 colleagues in queue, and then I will bring forward my motion. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councilmember Cano, for what you have brought forward. It's an important conversation. I would love to be able to be a part of the conversation. I know that Lake Street is much larger than anything we have in North Minneapolis, but I myself actually work with Breaking Free and Pride at the Family Partnership to do outreach to exploited women and girls along Lowry Avenue North. We do that once a week together. And so, I would love to be able to be in conversation with you as you're navigating the commercial sexual exploitation work, to be able to partner, and so we can learn from some of the work that you all are doing in South Minneapolis to be able to help bring some support to Black women and girls who are being exploited in North Minneapolis along Lowry Avenue North. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham. Council President Bender.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to appreciate your leadership in chairing the meeting today and your supportive leadership in helping shepherd ideas forward into the next meeting as you've proposed. I wanted to offer just some reflections generally to the council and again offer my support. I think it would be helpful if folks who have ideas for specific projects if they haven't yet, to check in with the mayor and the mayor's team to hear if there's synergy between any of the things that have been proposed. The mayor's proposal for this round of ARPA funding is at a pretty high level, you know, at least as it's presented in the public facing summaries. And so there may very well be buckets of funding that are possible or perhaps even already intended to be used for similar purposes. I would also really encourage the idea of thinking citywide and finding some of those partnerships like we just heard. Again, we do have adopted geographic priorities around race equity. We have cultural districts designated, we have green zones designated. So those of us who represent parts of the city that don't include those areas have committed our support to focusing resources in parts of the city that we don't represent. I just do think that that is a more appropriate way for us to create geographic priority, and probably, you know, probably on every issue there you know, is, you know, those challenges and benefits in those already designated geographic areas. And I think that will help, you know, empower our staff who will ultimately implement the RFPs and the contracts and all the things that need to go into administering the funds, you know, make sure that it's aligned with the work that they have underway. So those are just some general reflections and thoughts. Again, happy to support however I can in bringing these ideas to fruition. I would, oh, and the last thing is I do think, someone else said this earlier, I think that the mayor's proposal has a lot of really great ideas. I was able to find within a bucket some money that probably wasn't immediately ready to go right in 2021. And there are likely other areas where there are small amounts of funding that we can find within the already allocated funds. So I would really encourage folks to, as a first step, think about, is there a way to fund something within what's already been set aside? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Council President. Not seeing anyone else in queue, I will return to the motion I intend to make, which is to continue the mayor's budget proposals as amended to the regular committee of the whole meeting scheduled for July 1st, 2021 at 10 a.m. And so I will move that and see if there's any discussion from colleagues. And this, I believe, would still keep us on track to pass final action, take our final action on Friday, July 2nd. Seeing no discussion, I would ask the clerk to call the roll on that motion.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Osmond.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
Jenkins.
Aye.
Chair Ellison.
Aye.
There are 13 ayes.
And that motion carries. And so, you know, with that, we have concluded this committee's work, and we will continue our 2021 budget revisions related to funding for the American Rescue Plan Act to the regular count on July 1st. We will then go to full council, to the full city council, for the consideration of our final action on Friday, July 2nd, beginning at 9 a.m. Given that we're adjourning that we're continuing this item to the second meeting, and that we're not following this to council for final action, I'll just check in with the clerk real quick to ask if it's appropriate for us to adjourn this meeting. Great. So, thank you. Without objection, I will declare this meeting adjourned.